You know there's something profoundly disorienting about being left by someone you love, especially when you didn't expect it, when you thought things were building, not breaking. It hits you in the gut first. That raw, hollow H, like your chest has collapsed in on itself. You're left standing there trying to piece together what happened, replaying conversations, re-examining every moment with a microscope, wondering what you missed. And the most painful part, your source of wisdom, is not even the silence they leave behind. It's the fact that you chose to walk away, that they looked at everything you were, your hopes, your love, your loyalty, and said, not enough. There's this point, especially early on, where you feel small, not because you are, but because your sense of self was so tightly woven into the presence of another. You wake up in the morning and that first breath hurts. Nights are longer, food loses its taste. You question if maybe you were the problem, if maybe you were too much or too little, your source for wisdom. And that thought, it's poison, because it keeps you chained to the approval of someone who's already gone. And here's the real tragedy: in a moment, you will still want them, even after the disrespect, even after the abandonment. Your source for wisdom, there's this irrational hope that they'll come back and see your worth. That maybe if you hurt enough, it'll mean something to them, but it won't. Not in the way you think. Because people who leave without looking back don't suddenly become who you needed them to be. That's a dark place, but it's necessary, because it's in that darkness that you begin to see something else. Not all at once and not without pain, but slowly you realizing being left was not the end. It was the beginning of a painful but powerful transformation. Your source for wisdom, a call to confront everything you neglected in yourself while trying to be enough for someone else. And that moment, when you finally stop begging for someone to return and instead begin showing up for yourself, that's where strength is born. Because sometimes the most important thing you'll ever learn is this: just because someone walks away doesn't mean you were ever less worthy of staying for. After the dust settles and the initial sting begins to dull, even just slightly, something else starts to take hold. It's not relief, not yet. Your source for wisdom, it's more like quiet, a heavy, uncomfortable quiet where you're left alone with your thoughts, your memories, and the brutal honesty that comes from solitude. And that's where the real work begins, because healing isn't this neat, linear journey. Your source for wisdom, it's messy, it's inconvenient. It drags things out of you that you didn't even know were hiding. You begin to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. Maybe you journal. Maybe you talk to someone. Maybe you just stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and finally let yourself feel everything you've been repressing. But whatever path you take, one thing becomes clear: healing requires you to take responsibility, not for what they did, your source for wisdom, but for how you're going to carry what happened. You don't get to change the past, but you do get to decide what it means to you now. Some days you'll feel like you're making progress. You'll wake up with a bit more energy, a clearer mind, and a sense that maybe things are starting to click. Other days it'll hit you like it just happened yesterday. And that's okay. That's part of the process. The key is that you will keep going even when it doesn't feel like you're moving forward. Because every time you choose to face it, every time you refuse to numb out or run, you're reclaiming a piece of your power. And over time, without even realizing it, you start to build something new within yourself: a sturdiness, a self-respect that's no longer dependent on being chosen by someone else. You, for wisdom, you begin to see that healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about learning to carry it without letting it define you. You no longer need them to come back and make it right. your source for wisdom, because you're in the process of becoming someone who doesn't wait to be rescued. That's the quiet triumph of healing. Not some loud, dramatic breakthrough, but the simple, steady rebuilding of your soul brick by brick until one day you look in the mirror and realize you're no longer trying to fix the past. You're becoming someone who no longer needs it to be different. Something strange happens when enough time passes without their presence. You start to see clearly, not immediately, of course. At first, the memories are all golden, bathed in nostalgia and longing. You remember the laughter, the late night talks, the comfort. But as the emotional fog begins to lift, something else comes into view. You begin to notice what was actually there, and maybe more importantly, who wasn't. You start to see the small dismissals you brushed off, the way your needs were often met with silence or discomfort. You remember how often you felt like you were walking on eggshells just to keep the peace. And suddenly, your source for wisdom, you're no longer blinded by the fantasy of who you thought they were. You're seeing the reality of how they made you feel consistently, subtly, but undeniably. And that clarity, painful as it might be, is a gift because it frees you. It strips away the illusions you clung to, the justifications you whispered to yourself late at night. You realize that love isn't just about connection. It's about being seen, being valued, being safe. And maybe that wasn't what you had. Maybe what you call love was really attachment. Your source for wisdom, maybe what you thought was passion was just volatility. Your source for wisdom, and maybe you were trying so hard to hold it all together because you were afraid of being alone, not because it was truly right. In their absence, you begin to hear your own voice again. The one you quiet to keep them comfortable, the one you ignore to avoid conflict. And that voice, that sense of self, it gets louder, stronger, more certain. You begin to make decisions not out of fear or longing, but from clarity and alignment. And you stop romanticizing someone who was never fully invested in you in the first place. It's not bitterness. It's not resentment. Your source for wisdom, it's recognition. It's peace. It's finally understanding that sometimes yours for wisdom, losing someone, is the very thing that allows you to find yourself. And when that clarity takes hold, it becomes harder and harder to mourn the loss because you realize what you lost wasn't a soulmate. It was a story you outgrew. With time and space, something else begins to shift. Not just how you see her, but how you see yourself. Your source for wisdom, the longer you spend outside that relationship, the more you realize how much of yourself you put on hold to keep it alive. How many compromises you made, not out of mutual respect, but out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being alone, fear of losing something you thought you needed. But distance does more than give perspective. It gives you a chance to grow. You'll start to read more, reflect more. Maybe you pick up a discipline, something hard that demands consistency. You push yourself physically, mentally, spiritually, and slowly the version of you that existed back then, the one who tolerated the bare minimum, the one who settled just to feel chosen, begins to fade. You become someone different, not harder, but stronger, not colder, but wiser. You develop standards, not walls, but boundaries. And those standards aren't about punishing anyone. They're about honoring the version of yourself that fought like hell to rebuild. You begin to want different things. Deeper things, not just connection, but compatibility, not just chemistry, but a character. And here's the beautiful irony. You no longer crave what once consumed you. What you used to call love now feels like imbalance. What used to thrill you now feels chaotic. You see it for what it was. And more importantly, you see yourself for who you are now. You're not chasing anymore. You're choosing deliberately, quietly, from a place of alignment, not desperation. This evolution, it's not loud, No one hands you a medal, your source, no applause, but it's real. You start speaking up more. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. You trust your good instead of suppressing it for someone else's comfort. You look back not with longing, but with gratitude for the lessons. Because without the break, there would have been no breakthrough. Your source for wisdom, and that's the turning point, not when she returns, not when she says she misses you. Your source for wisdom, it's when you realize you've grown into someone who no longer fits into the space you once begged to be let back into. When she comes back, it often feels like a test, an invitation to revisit a chapter you thought was closed. She might say she's changed, that she's realized what she lost. The words may sound familiar, even comforting at first, but you notice the difference in yourself, the old yearning, the desperate hope that things could go back to the way they were is gone. In its place stands something quieter, steadier discernment. It's not about bitterness or resentment. It's about knowing your own worth, your own growth, and recognizing that what was once acceptable no longer is. When she returns, it's like seeing a ghost of the past, not a promise of the future. You can hear the echoes of old patterns in her voice, see the same hesitations, the same excuses. And you realize that the choice you once thought was yours to make, to stay or to leave, is no longer a dilemma. You have already chosen yourself. This moment is less dramatic than you might expect. There's no grand confrontation, your wisdom or fiery declaration. Instead, it's a quiet acknowledgement that your life has moved on without her. You don't need to prove anything, convince her of your value, or explain why you're no longer interested. Your absence speaks louder than words. And here's the truth. Her return is less about her and more about you. It reveals how far you've come, how much you've grown, your source for wisdom. It highlights the boundaries you've set and the respect you've learned to demand, not from others, but from yourself. You've learned that love isn't about chasing someone who left. It's about creating space for the love that honors your worth. Your source for wisdom, when she comes, it's too late. Not because you're unforgiving, but because you're no longer willing to settle. Your source for wisdom because you've realized that your time, your heart, and your energy are too precious to be given to someone who once walked away without a second thought. The power lies in your refusal to step backward, to shrink yourself, to fit into a place that no longer fits who you've become. And that refusal, that quiet, unwavering decision is the greatest victory of all. As we come to the close of this journey, one that begins with loss and unfolds into profound transformation, it's important to recognize what this story really teaches us. Your source for wisdom, when she comes back, it's not just about her return, it's about your growth, your awakening, and the unwavering commitment you make to yourself. You've moved through pain, embraced healing, found clarity in absence, and evolved into someone who no longer chases what wants, but chooses what is right for you. The past no longer holds you captive because you've taken back your power and learned that closure isn't something given. It's something you create. So when she comes back, remember, the greatest love, the deepest respect, and the trust piece come from within. And that, above all else, is where your freedom begins. Closure is one of those concepts we often misunderstand. We think it means getting an apology, a clear explanation, or some grand finale that neatly ties up the story. But real closure isn't about waiting for someone else to give it to you. Your source for wisdom is not a gift they hand over when they decide they're ready. True closure comes from within. It's an act of reclaiming your own narrative on your own terms, your source for wisdom. You don't need to hear the reasons why she left or why she came back. You don't need to watch her regret or prove that she's changed. Your source for wisdom, all of those things might happen, but none of them will give you peace unless you've already made the choice to find it inside yourself. Because for wisdom, closure is less about the other person and more about how you decide to live your life after. It's about stepping into your own power and saying, this chapter is over, not because of what you did, but because I am choosing to move forward. It's about refusing to let the past define your present or dictate your future. You carry the lessons with you, but you don't carry the pain as a burden or a chain. And here's the thing, closure isn't a moment. It's a process. It shows up in the quiet decisions, like when you choose kindness over bitterness, patience over anger, and self-respect over desperation. It shows up when you stop revisiting old wounds and start building new strengths. When you look at yourself in the mirror and finally see not just the person who was hurt, but the person who endured, who grew, your wisdom who refused to be diminished. No, you don't need her to validate your worth or give you the ending you thought you deserved. You give that to yourself. You decide that your story isn't about waiting for someone to come back. It's about walking forward, sometimes alone, sometimes stronger than ever before. And in that walking forward, you discover the deepest truth of all. The most powerful love you will ever know is the one you give to yourself. Because when you can stand there fully and unapologetically choosing yourself first, you will never again be lost in someone else's absence.